Welcome back to Case Analysis, and if you're here, it means you're someone who believes that Officer John O'Keefe deserves the truth, whatever that truth might be. Welcome to part 2 of my deep dive series on the O'Keefe case. This video isn't just part 2 of an investigation. It's an invitation to think again, to see the evidence through a human lens. The story isn't about right or wrong theories, it's about finding justice for John O'Keefe, by remembering that the closest truth is often the hardest to see. Now, if you haven't seen part 1, start there. It covers the blood evidence and questions that got this deep dive rolling for me. There's another piece of this puzzle that deserves a second look: the Waterfall bar footage. Sometimes the most compelling theories are the ones that feel right until they don't. Interesting that out of the group, Brian Higgins is the only single person in the group.
Like a relationship. The same thing everybody wants, a real relationship.
It's a small detail that normally would be irrelevant, but in this situation it stands out. Caitlin Albert and her boyfriend Tristan Morris head to the Waterfall for dinner around 6 p.m. Now, they live in Easton and make the trip to Canton. Tristan's planning to leave soon after because he expects to be called in early to plow roads when the storm gets serious. So Caitlin invites her mom, Nicole Albert. Now, Nicole and Julie Albert join Caitlin at the Waterfall likely around 8 p.m. Elsewhere, Jen McCabe is finishing up a sporting event for her daughter. Nicole sends a text to Jen inviting her to the bar. So Jen pushes the invite wider to a group text to the other parents. One parent answers Nicholas Kalakithis, an attorney, and his wife Karina, a pharmacist, who drinks nothing but water that entire night, which gives us one sober witness. Meanwhile, Chris Albert, after closing D&E, joins the group. Earlier in the day, Brian Albert and Brian Higgins had been in New York at a funeral for a police officer. With a storm coming and flights at risk of cancellation, they drive back, joined by Kevin Albert and Eddie Hernandez. So Brian decide to go to the hillside for drinks and some food. Brian Albert leaves the hillside and heads to the Waterfall after Nicole texts him that Caitlin is there. And then he arrives at the Waterfall around 9:30. Brian Albert invites Higgins, who stays behind to finish eating, and then he arrives at the Waterfall. Meanwhile, at C.F. McCarthy's, John O'Keefe is out with friends, celebrating his niece's private school acceptance. Karen Reed goes to meet John later that night. Jen McCabe invites John to the Waterfall, and although Karen isn't interested in going, she agrees for John's sake. It's January in Boston, and a storm is heading to Canton. Most of America hears blizzard and thinks panic, stocking bread, milk, and batteries. But in the Boston area, if it's not the blizzard of 78, it's just another night out. The simplest explanation tends to be the right one, according to Occam's razor. It doesn't mean every simple answer is right, but it does mean we should ask if there's a less complicated explanation for what we're seeing. I want you to watch this waterfall footage with me again, but this time I'm going to ask you to do something that might feel impossible. I want you to forget everything you think you know about what happened and just watch it from a human behavior point of view. Because what I'm about to show you changed my theory.
Yes, I was happy to see them.
Why were you happy to see them?
Because I loved John and I liked Karen.
The first relevant footage for our timeline captures the arrival of John O'Keefe and Karen Reed. They enter the Waterfall together. No sign of conflict, no indication of what's to come. John walks in with Karen. He's social, warm, shakes hands, gives hugs. He just seems so genuine. The kind of guy who just makes everybody feel at ease, and he's just blissfully unaware of all the undercurrents swirling around him. But Karen takes it a long way around that table, like it's a minefield. This is not accidental. This is deliberate avoidance. Now, we have to remember, the room is very loud with the band playing, and John and Karen have only been there a minute, and Higgins is already pulling Brian Albert off to the side to talk. Now, so many people, myself included, viewed these side conversations as dark, planning, plotting, conspiring. I'm starting to see it from a different light. I'm getting the feeling that it's something like middle school, like total middle school. So I feel like maybe Higgins is suggesting, hey, she's here. Should I go talk to her? Should I go ask why she didn't text me back? Should I buy her a drink? Because we have to remember Brian Higgins is extremely immature with relationships. He is incapable of picking up cues. Brian Higgins has been drinking a lot. He's emotionally vulnerable, and he's developed what's clearly an inappropriate fixation on Karen Reed. He's been texting Karen, but she's been ignoring him completely. Higgins seems less engaged with most of the group, and he's more preoccupied with Karen's attention or lack thereof. Higgins is constantly seeking approval and acceptance from Brian. It's subtle, but it's there. John hasn't done anything to incite anger among him, so I don't think it's some kind of conspiratorial, something dark or sinister right now. I think it's just Higgins being immature. And I think Brian Albert is like, dude, you've got to let it go. She's with John. She's not interested in you. Let it go. Let's go have fun. What Brian Albert is telling Higgins is not what Higgins wants to hear.
I mean, I didn't notice any issues or any negative things happening. All the conversations seemed positive, lighthearted. Everyone was just kind of having a good time, getting along. I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary, really.
Just normal. I thought it was just normal. Sitting listening to a band.
Everybody was enjoying each other's company, correct?
Fine, friendly, normal, typical night, just out having a drink, listening to music. Cheerful. Good mood. Everybody was just out having a drink. We all knew the storm was coming tomorrow, and, just a typical average night.
Generally, it was a fun atmosphere. There was a live band. Everybody was in a good mood. I think people were singing to some of the music, so it was a fun atmosphere.
Everybody was happy, having a good time. The whole time I was there was no issues at all.
In one word, it would be fun. Everybody was in a great mood. People were getting along. It was friends and family, and just seemed like a great night.
It was a good time. No, it was a good time, and there was a band. It was great. Band was playing. I did not feel ignored and didn't upset me at all.
But it bothered you enough to send her a text, didn't it?
No, it was a flirtatious text. It was just, that was it.
It bothered you enough to send her a text that said, with 6 M's behind it.
Okay.
And, well, correct?
Well, it wasn't like that. It was, well. That's it.
Just, well, like a well in the ground.
I think you know what I mean.
Yeah, I think you do too, sir. You meant, well, when are you going to pay attention to me?
No, that's not correct.
Well, why are you ignoring me?
It's not correct.
Well, am I chopped liver?
Objection.
So this is the moment the night turned. Jameson swirling in his veins, pride in shreds, Higgins decides to text Karen. Right there, with John just feet away from him. This isn't strategic. This isn't calculated. This is complete desperation. After Higgins sends the text, you see these signs of expectation, social anxiety, and he has this need for validation or response. No reply. Watches, waits. Every silence an insult. Every glance a wound. Higgins checks his phone once, twice, again, and every silence from Karen is another blow. He desperately wants attention from Karen, and he's not going to get it. It's just fueling him and fueling him. Higgins is just an emotionally raw man hoping for a message that will never come. And we are watching real-time rejection.
John went over to Karen and he gave her a kiss on the forehead. Honestly, I'd never seen something like that before, a boyfriend do to a girlfriend in public. Never saw that. So it just stood out to me. I was like, wow, that's the sweetest thing I've ever seen.
They were affectionate toward each other, loving toward each other, and to the point where my wife even made a comment, why are you not like that with me?
I knew of him, and I had met him a couple times, but nothing more than that.
I just know him from being friends with my brother-in-law.
I had met Brian a few times, social settings. I recall meeting him at the Junction one evening. I believe I met him at a graduation party. I don't know how many times I met Brian, but I met him maybe 3, 4 times. I don't know exactly how many. So I knew who he was.
And that's how you knew him, was through Brian Albert?
Yes.
I had met him a few times. He's Brian Albert's friend.
So other than being your brother-in-law's friend and meeting him a couple times, you didn't really know him that well, fair to say?
Good, yes. I had met him a few times when he was out with Brian.
You had met him a few times before that night?
Yes.
Were you friendly with him?
He was a friend of Brian's.
Was he your friend?
No, he's Brian's friend.
I don't know how I initially met him, but probably seen him around. I knew that he worked as an ATF agent. I knew that he worked inside the Canton Police Department, so I think I knew him from that, just being around.
fair to say you knew him sort of through your brothers, either Brian or Kevin or both?
Yeah, that's the only way I met him.
So I know Brian Higgins initially from work, a professional relationship. I've known him known of him for 10 or 15 years. And then the past few years, more recently, we worked together on a closer basis, and I became better friends with him. I think I first met Mr. Higgins about 15 years ago.
How did you meet him?
It was a professional, something at work. We may have worked together. I think at the time he was a Cambridge arson squad member, and I think he came into the city of Boston to do something for work.
So you've known him for 15 years, and you were with him on January 28th, 2022, correct?
Yes.
And he's the person that you were, quote, joking and fooling around with, right?
Yes.
Another thing that I think is important, paying attention to what these people say about Higgins, because as you notice, Brian Albert is the only one that's really a friend of Higgins. All these other people, they don't really know him. They only know him as Brian's friend. And if anything, they kind of put distance between them and him. This is important to draw attention to because if Higgins is the one that hurt John, why would any of these people protect him? Why would they perjure themselves for this dude? They don't even hardly know him. And then on the flip side, I look at it like one of these other people is responsible for John's death. Why would Higgins protect any of them? He's not close with them. You know, why would he risk everything for these people? It sets Higgins up to be the next scapegoat because none of them are close. So what do they have to lose? Nothing. So as it stood, Karen was their scapegoat. Throw it on Karen. That didn't work out so well for them. So who are they going to throw it on next? Who wasn't in their release statement just hours after the verdict of the retrial? That would be Higgins. Who wasn't included in their interview the day after the verdict? That would be Higgins. So Higgins is set up perfectly to be the next scapegoat. A shot of Fireball, another toast. So let me paint you two psychological pictures based on what we see in this footage. Brian Higgins, despite being a federal agent, his emotional responses to rejection are adolescent. The texting patterns, the inability to read social cues, the need for constant validation from male peers. When alcohol is added to this psychological profile, especially in a public setting where he's just been humiliated, the potential for poor judgment skyrockets. Now, Brian Albert, this is a man who spent his career managing crisis situations. Watching his behavior throughout this footage, he's constantly assessing, redirecting. When Higgins starts to spiral, Brian Albert's first instinct isn't to enable it or exploit it. His instinct is to contain it. So I feel like Brian Albert's just using humor and mock combat to keep Higgins in check. It's a form of containment. Brian Albert has plenty of parenting experience with 5 kids. Is it possible that Brian Albert is observing the spiral of Higgins and he is doing what many parents do to their children? They redirect them. Is he trying to redirect Higgins to keep him out of trouble? Every frame has been analyzed, enhanced, debated. But in watching it forensic style, the real story gets lost. Human nature, pride, rejection, the limits of loyalty, and the messiness of truth. Sometimes the answer isn't a plot, it's a collapse. A group failing to see the warning lights until it's too late. By morning, a tragedy is set. Reality rushes in. Sirens, headlines, lives upended. And beneath every speculation is a simpler story. Sometimes the most dangerous night isn't the one that's planned. It's the one everyone thinks they've got under control. So why does any of this matter? Because understanding what really happened at the Waterfall impacts how we interpret the rest of the story, especially what happened to John O'Keefe after he left the Waterfall. You know, maybe this was darker, colder, more deliberate than I'm seeing it. But what if it wasn't? What if the truth is more human and in some ways more tragic? Because sometimes the worst outcomes don't come from evil plans. They come from ordinary flaws, colliding in extraordinary ways. And in the case of John O'Keefe, maybe that's the hardest truth to face. As glass is empty and midnight approaches, the invitations start. Let's go to 34 Fairview. It's standard. One party flows into the next. But if this was a conspiracy, why invite Nicholas and Karina? Why expand the circle? If this night was cooked up as a plot, why bring outsiders in? Why offer so many people a ticket to the crime scene?
Well, after the band wrapped up, I was getting ready to leave, and I just kind of leaned over to my sister Jennifer and said, "Hey, Brian Jr.'s at the house. I think he just has 2 friends there. He's going to be turning 23 at midnight. If on your way home and you want to just swing by and say happy birthday, if you want to do that, come by and do that." And she was like, "Okay, And then I was just kind of gathering up my stuff, and I got ready to leave. It may have been mentioned at the table, but I had no idea, if anyone else was interested in doing that or wanted to do it. I had just said it to my sister.
Okay, we're going to go back home, have a beer with Brian if anyone would like to come. Brian Albert, Sr., just made a general, hey, I'm going to go home, have a drink with Brian if anyone would like to come. It was expressed to everyone, like, hey, we're going to go back home, have a beer with Brian if anyone would like to come. I said, oh, you guys should come. Do you want to come? Before Brian Albert left, he said to the group, hey, we're going to go back home and have a beer with Brian Jr. If anyone wants to come by.
Brian Albert, the homeowner, had invited the group back to his house. I can't remember if it was come back to my house or come back to 34 Fairview, but that was his residence.
Someone mentioned going back to my brother's house after.
I think Jen McCabe brought up, let's go to my sister's house. I think it was said out loud, like, hey, anybody wants to go, we can go to my sister's on Fairview. I wasn't specifically invited myself. I just think it was put out there.
So it ended up being my son Brian's 23rd birthday. So at 12 o'clock, he would be 23. So there was some discussion about if anybody wanted to go by the house to kind of say happy birthday to him. And I know my wife Nicole mentioned it to Jen and Matt, and it was said, I believe, in the group where we were standing.
And at some point, that transitioned into going back to Brian Albert's house.
They both wanted to come, and they said they were coming, yes. Everybody seemed to want to go back.
There's no way we're going anywhere. We're going home.
I don't really remember the responses. I don't think I knew for sure if anybody was going to come, except Brian Higgins said he would come by.
My impression was that it was an open invitation, and I planned on heading over there. Jameson and ginger. Jameson and ginger. Jameson and ginger.
Now we get to the famous confrontation sequence. And I need you to watch this with fresh eyes because we may have been misreading this entire dynamic. Higgins is about to transform from merely drunk annoying to genuinely drunk problematic. His last desperate attempt to get attention from Karen. When Higgins first yells, I feel like it's more towards the direction of Karen. And then you see when he's motioning like, come on, to John, he kind of moves over to a slightly different angle. I can't find anything from John that would fuel Higgins' anger like this. But Karen, yes, she has not returned his text. She didn't open his text. She's completely ignored him tonight. To me, that's fuel. To me, that's where he's mad. And so I think in this beginning part, he's yelling something to Karen. Look at Chris Albert and his body language. This isn't someone executing a plan. This is someone preventing a drunk friend from making a scene that he won't be able to take back. And you see Chris Albert grab Higgins' arm to prevent him from something. That kind of speaks volumes, knowing the dynamic, that they're not close friends. So just imagine restraining someone you're not close friends with. Why would you do that? Now, when you look at John's reaction, he's not threatened. He's not angry. He looks amused. I think he's just laughing and thinking how trashed Higgins is, and it's funny. I mean, Higgins is probably slurring everything he's saying because to John, this is just Higgins being Higgins. It's a drinking buddy who gets a little too animated when he's had too much whiskey. He's completely oblivious to the drama that just unfolded. While Higgins was spiraling over Karen's rejection, while the Albert brothers were managing a crisis, John was simply paying his tab. When Brian Albert joins in and they're having a conversation, I don't think this is conspiring any longer. I don't think it's about John. I'm starting to believe this is just crisis management. Chris Albert recognizes that Higgins is about to cross a line that can't be uncrossed. In this moment, I think Chris Albert is telling Brian Albert, dude, you need to get control of your boy. He's out of hand. He does not need to drive to West Roxbury. He needs to go to your house and sober up before letting him drive. He can't drive home like this. There's visible frustration. Nobody wants to babysit a 50-something-year-old drunk man. So I feel like the plan was for Higgins to drive to 34 Fairview, which is very close by, and Brian Albert would tell him just to follow him while he's out drunk driving, basically. And so then I think in Higgins' mind, he's like, well, you know what? I'm going to tell John. I'm going to expose everything to John. And so Higgins is motioning for John. He wants to make sure John comes with Karen and he can expose Karen to John in front of her. And then he'll get attention from her. One way or another, he is determined to get attention from Karen Reed. The waterfall footage has been analyzed extensively and deservedly so. It's crucial evidence. but evidence can be interpreted different ways, and those interpretations matter. If we're going to find the truth about what happened to Officer John O'Keefe, we need to be willing to question our assumptions, to look at human behavior through multiple lenses, to consider that sometimes the simplest explanation, flawed people making poor decisions, might be closer to the truth than elaborate conspiracies. For months, many of us have been operating under the assumption that what we're seeing here is evidence of premeditation, of conspiracy, of calculated evil. And maybe it is. Sometimes the real evil isn't in the planning. It's in the cover-up that comes after. So ask yourself, did Officer John O'Keefe's tragedy come from careful plotting or from mistakes that spiraled? Was it malice or the universal failure of people to manage a storm of emotions and alcohol? Now, this doesn't change what happened later that night. It doesn't absolve anyone of responsibility for John's death, but it might change how we understand the chain of events that led to the tragedy.
I believe I walked out with Karen. I know I walked out with Karen, and I believe Miss Kolakidis as well. So at one point I said, "Oh, Karen, why don't you just come with me?" Figuring, because, Matt can talk to anyone, and God knows how long he was going to stay in there. So I was just like, "Hey, do you want to drive with me?" And they can meet us. Out with Miss Reed, and we spoke at the doorway, and then John joined us.
Did you invite Miss Reed to come with you?
I did, yes.
Did she decline?
Yes.
Matt and I stayed back a little bit. We helped clean up the table with the bottles and glasses. We spoke to the band briefly, told them how well they played. So we were a little bit later, maybe a couple of minutes later than the rest of the group.
So as we were leaving, Jen went over to Karen, kind of put her arm around her, and she started saying, "You're coming with me, you're coming with me." And Karen's like, "Oh, like, what? Like, where are we going?" And it just was strange. It was just like, "You're coming with me." Like, it was just something that stood out to me.
You never know when it's your last walk, your last laugh, or your last ride home. In less than half an hour, everything will change.
And Trooper Bukaki?